Welcome to the Cities Are for Living podcast, an official podcast of the International Project Management Association. Join hosts Dr. Beverly Passien from the Netherlands and Peter Ahmad from South Africa as they explore this world of smart and livable cities. Through the stories and perspectives shared by project managers across the globe, each episode seeks to offer valuable insights, practical advice, and engaging discussions on the latest best practices in the project management field. The Cities Are for Living podcast is for project managers, built environment professionals, and community groups interested in expanding a community of practice, maximizing the impacts of projects across the globe, and enhancing the quality of life for all citizens. Welcome to this latest episode of the Cities Are for Living podcast, an official podcast of the International Project Management Association. And in this episode, recorded earlier this month on June the 6th, we welcome project managers Ben Peters and Rob Loubser from the city of Cape Town. Ben and Rob bring a wealth of experience and insights into the challenges and successes of managing development in Cape Town through their project management skills. Ben Peters, who chairs the Urban and Rural Special Interest Group, with his extensive background in industrial engineering and project management, has played a pivotal role in transforming the city of Cape Town's approach to project management and portfolio management during his time with the city. His leadership during the city's worst drought in hundreds of years and his innovative strategies around water supply and project management techniques have been instrumental in ensuring the city's sustainability and resilience when it comes to both water supply and managing demand. Ben's contribution extends beyond the water space and into other capital projects in the city. At the moment, the city of Cape Town is embarking on an ambitious 120 billion rand capital expenditure program over the next decade. He's also redefined the concepts and the procedures behind project and program management within the city of Cape Town, focused on organizational maturity, competence, and excellence in service delivery. Rob Loubser is a civil engineer with diverse international experience, and he's contributed significantly to the city's infrastructure development since his arrival in the early days of COVID in 2020. His work in project management, his commitment to serving the citizens of Cape Town, has been crucial in navigating the complexities of urban planning and service delivery. His own journey includes building bridges in Dubai, working on large-scale property development, and leading projects that directly benefit the residents of Cape Town. His approach emphasizes the importance of community involvement and strategic planning to ensure that projects meet the needs of citizens. Together, Ben and Rob share their experiences, the challenges and the lessons learned, the good, the bad and the ugly. From managing crises such as the water shortage and COVID-19 pandemic, the insights into the importance of community involvement, strategic planning and leadership altogether combine to provide valuable lessons for cities across the world. Join myself, Peter Ahmad, and my colleague Beverly Passien as we delve into their stories and explore the innovative approaches that have shaped Cape Town's journey towards becoming a smarter and more resilient city. As always, we hope you enjoy the episode. So it's a Friday afternoon, it's the 6th of June, halfway through the year already. It's hard to believe that, but it's fantastic to be back on the Cities Are for Living podcast and reaching out to Beverly in Utrecht. How are you today, Bev? How's things going your side?
I'm great, thank you. It's been a few weeks since our first podcast, and I've been looking forward to restarting our conversations, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation with Ben and Rob.
Fantastic. Absolutely delighted to welcome Ben Peters and Rob Loubser, based at the city of Cape Town. How are you both this afternoon, Ben and Rob? What's news?
Thanks for having us, Peter and Bev. Much appreciated. Here in Cape Town, the most beautiful place in the world. Very fortunate to live here. But it's going all well here. It's that time of the year for us and trying to just conclude on the delivery of the portfolio, see what's coming in.
Yeah, hi,
Fantastic
afternoon,
stuff,
Pete and
Ben.
Bev. Nice to be here with you.
It's great to have you with us, Rob, and absolutely delighted that the both of you could make it. And I think declaration of interest right up front. Ben and I go way back. We worked together at the City of Cape Town for many years. It's great to have you on here, Ben, now in a slightly different role. Here's me asking the questions and you fielding some answers to those. But I think we also had a slight overlap, if I remember correctly. Rob, you were appointed around 2020, around the COVID period, if I remember, at the City of Cape Town.
That's correct. Yeah, I started in the middle of COVID. So my first day at the office, I was sent home immediately.
What, they heard you were coming?
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Fantastic. And Ben, your journey to the city. Tell us a bit about your own background, what brought you to the project management team and the thought leading in the city space there at the City of Cape Town.
I studied industrial engineering at the University of Pretoria. I was fortunate enough to start my career in the project management field. Initially, I was very interested in bulk transport logistics, and I thought that is where the world is going to take me. I joined a small consulting company in Pretoria, and my first assignment was that of optimization model for tendering purposes for all by ABSA. It was just about all logistical planning and vehicles for grant payouts, etc. That was part of the feasibility work. The company that I worked with was just consulting in project and program management. I started off as a project controller. After a couple of years, I became a project manager. Initially, I just did business improvement projects, time and attendance system installations and feasibilities, fuel management, fleet management, those kind of stuff, trying to optimize various transport routes for some of the contractor guys that's transporting the coal from one place to another. I then ultimately became more involved into more the civil and the construction world, where I was fortunate enough to do bulk diesel facilities, petrochemical and the like. A couple of years later, I became a senior project manager. I've delivered a huge greenfield coal development, which was multidisciplinary. Further to that, I've completed various project planning just before I moved to Cape Town on the urology hospital in Pretoria. And then I got the opportunity to join the City of Cape Town, and initially were appointed as senior project manager. Then we had the worst drought in 300 years in Cape Town. I believe, Pete, you can remember those days. And then that my previous executive director, called Craig Tesson, approached me, and I can remember that day he knocked on my door and he said, we've got a water problem to solve. I'll see you in my office tomorrow morning at 7:30. That is when I took over as program manager for the water resilience program in Cape Town. After I've delivered for a period of about 2 years on that program, I got the opportunity to become the portfolio manager, looking after the capital and grant funded project portfolio for the city. And a few years later, I got the opportunity to become the director of corporate project program portfolio management, which also includes that of engineering management in the city, those three disciplines. And then on the 21st of November 2020, I got a call from the CFO and the ED, and they said to me, from tomorrow onwards, contract management will reporting to you. We've got things to get going. And been very, very happy since then. So running 5 different disciplines, I've got a very unique approach where I focus purely on what is the organizational maturity in terms of processes, governance, as well as that of competence. Great focus on the individuals, where it's all about making sure that we get individuals that is competent in those disciplines, trying to deliver, whether it's a project, a contract, or engineering matter, deliver on those, and then ultimately the delivery of excellence of our portfolio. And I see those 3 disciplines as interlinked with each other, because you cannot get excellent delivery if you don't have competent people and a mature organization, and you cannot increase the maturity if you don't deliver and you don't have the competence, and you cannot increase the competence if you don't deliver and you don't have a mature organization. So that is ultimately the strategy that I'm following. I've been in this position now very close to, it's 6 years now, and going strength to strength. I believe I've turned around quite a big portion of how the city operates within the space. I've redefined what project management is. I've redefined what program management is, and then also how do we follow a detailed portfolio approach. And I've set in motion various processes and things to help us to deliver. I can recall when the current mayor, Jordan Lewis, approached me and he said to me, we will need to ramp up your capital portfolio and double it up. I wasn't scared because I know that the various processes and procedures is in place to enable us to get there. And it was just to enhance those particular processes continuously.
I have no doubt we'll cover some of those. You talked about day zero and the drought. COVID would have been a huge response. And now, as you say, a significant, if I'm not mistaken, 120 billion rand budget to plan for and sort out in terms of a project pipeline over the next 10 years. So looking forward to hearing about that. Rob, from your side, maybe, and I know you've been with the city for coming up to 5 years, but prior to that, you've got another 15 years of a very impressive track record. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and how you came to land up there at the city where you were sent home on day one?
Yeah, Pete, I'm a civil engineer, so I studied civil engineering. The first thing I did after I studied was I decided, look, I need to get some context and I need to see how people do it in other places. So I decided to take a bit of a risk, worked for a couple of months, jumped on a plane and tried to find myself a job in London. So what I did was I started there, managed to fairly quickly get a job. I worked there for a consultancy for a few years and sort of traditional sort of structural engineering, typical design type of work. And then I got an opportunity to go to the desert to go and build some bridges in Dubai. And actually not even Dubai, up north of Dubai, a place called Ras Al Khaimah. And I took the opportunity. I thought, well, this sounds pretty exciting. So I went for a 10-month contract to Dubai and ended up staying there for about 12 years. I mean, it was a formative time for me. I went there and I was only 24 years old when I went there. And I got to see the place build and grow over the years. So that came out of, those initial growth phases of that whole area. A lot of that I've taken with me, and, the type of mindsets and the type of reaction to scale that existed at the time. I mean, I'll give you an example. There was no public transport there in 2006, and then they decided, let's build a metro. And 2009, there was a metro. That was the kind of thinking that was happening in that space. And I did work for property developers there. We built a whole city area in part of Dubai, and I got to sort of experience it from all angles. I married a Scottish girl. She was an air hostess there in Dubai, and we met. And I convinced her to come back to South Africa in 2016. So I came back here, and I worked here for consultancies as well. And I was very much involved on the business side of things. Even in Dubai, we started off a company there with my old employer from the UK. And then in 2020, I decided to take the leap over to the public sector, which I didn't know what to expect, to be quite honest with you. And as I said earlier, day one, I arrived all excited to see what's going to happen. And I was told, no, you got to work from home. It was lockdown, So I was lucky enough to land myself in Ben's team. And Ben's team is a bit different. And I think that what I found was a very dynamic group of people. I mean, I walked in and I thought, there is some really, really smart people working here. I better pull my socks up. And it was inspiring because we had this flat structure and we all just sort of got involved in things all over the place. And it was really inspiring for me. And I think, to be quite honest, and I'm not just saying this has probably been some of the best professional years of my life in the city, because you get to do stuff that benefit the people of the city at the end of the day. So, yeah, that's sort of the long short of where I'm coming from.
Well, again, thanks for the background from both of you. And again, I think it's fantastic that there's the competence that you're reflecting, the experience there, and that in terms of service delivery, public sector here in the municipality, City of Cape Town, that they get the benefit of that. I say, looking forward to hearing the stories, your reflections on what the challenges have been. Before we get into the City of Cape Town specifics, I'm going to invite Beverly perhaps just to give a bit of a sense of what I understand to be called the SIG, the Smart Cities Special Interest Group, which to anybody from the outside sounds like a weird acronym, but I think it's really important just to set the scene, Bev, as to what the SIG is and how you're coordinating that and what the roles of Ben and Rob are and the rest of your committee that are steering that work.
It's funny for me to be introduced as somebody to coordinate the SIG. And in fact, I'm probably the newest member of the SIG under Ben's leadership.
Smart cities is all about technology. And in the context of third and first world countries, for a third world city to become smarter is different for a third world country than what it is for a first world country. And it's about getting smarter. And how do you become smarter in that particular space? The initial thinking was all about livability, workability, and sustainability. And how do you bring those three aspects all together into the space of becoming smarter? Because for us in Cape Town, we don't have all the smart technologies, yes, and we are trying to roll those kind of things out. But for us, rolling out smart meters is becoming smarter. You can touch base on all three aspects on livability, workability, and sustainability. But when you go to Dublin, they already have all their smart meters in the dustbins and all across those walls. For them to become smarter is, how do we use the data to optimize the delivery towards workability, livability, and sustainability? I think, Bev, it was about a year ago now that we moved over to the Urban Rural Interest Group, and we changed the name. And
That's right.
And the urban world has got a huge impact onto the rural aspects of life and vice versa. The rural guys is also having impact onto the urban sector. And how do you balance the need between urban and rural ultimately? And how do you augment both and contribute of helping each other to grow? Because the rural needs to provide food. And we know that in the urban environment, you can't live without food. So once again, it's the livability component. The urban world is where your economic hubs and stuff is, and it's about the workability, but you don't want to hamstring the rural aspects, and you want to have a balance between those two.
I remember when we were switching the SIG names, reflecting our awareness that the enormous growth of small to medium-sized cities was going to be fueled in part by the expansion to the rural space. The necessity to include that perspective, I think, was something that the SIG caught on to rightly, and we broadened our SIG name to reflect that.
As technology, as the world progresses, the dividing line between urban and rural is not as distinct as it used to be in the past, where cities used to the curve of living standard and of innovation and what have you has always been quite more pronounced in the urban space. Accelerated, I think, by all of the remote aspects that COVID brought to us. A lot of people moved out of cities and a lot of people moved into urban or rural areas. And that kind of eliminated it to us that you cannot just look at the one without looking at the other. So I think that it was an appropriate move at the time.
I couldn't agree more. And many triangles come to my mind when I think of key cities around the world that are connected to other cities in a triangular way, and that the spread of those core cities is going into rural spaces that need to be a part of the growth and sophistication of the built environment. And I also think that there are property ownership considerations that urban planners may not fully appreciate, but once they start speaking to those in the rural world, will change smart city planning conversations.
I always take it back to the three major components that becoming smarter is not just about technology. Yes, it's got a role to play, and there's a place and a point in time where you need to consider technology, because ultimately technology enables you to obtain data and to get more sophisticated. But you need to see it in the context of the urban environment, the rural environment that you sit within, and you need to try to always find the balance to all sides.
That's an important point, Ben, because I think a lot of smart city type of initiatives focus a lot on the technology for the sake of the technology. And I think what makes this a little bit different is it focuses on the outcomes of it and the way that it is pushing society rather than the technology itself. So the technology, as Ben just said, is an enabler rather than the end.
And that is something that is a core message, thankfully, being shared at much higher levels of government now than even when the three of us started talking, 4 years ago. I know that the quality of life message is part of European Commission funded projects. And it was not that long ago that quality of life was not seen as the ends. It wasn't even heard in the conversations, that it was the tech-centric view of smart city planning that was the goal for everybody in that space. So I'm glad the conversations are changing, and I hope that the guests of this podcast share that view. If we could return just quickly to something that, Rob, I think it was you said this, that in your role with the City of Cape Town, you're very proud of the fact that as a professional project manager, you are having a direct impact on the citizens that you serve. I would like to return to that theme. One of the outcomes from my own research, and indeed my view as a project manager and smart city researcher, is that the project manager sitting at the table that I would like to be aware of and motivated by the citizens that are benefiting from the decisions that he or she makes in terms of urban planning and the built environment. How do you keep the citizens' needs in mind when you are at that same table with Ben or with other colleagues?
The citizens, basically, their needs are reflected in the decisions and I wouldn't say political, but the agenda of the people who serve them, right? So there are top level type of needs that gets reflected. Now that's at the top level, and it sort of sets the compass, right, to the direction we should be going. We should be focusing on housing or the quality thereof, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing, because that's at a high level, at a city level, but at the project side of it, and if any project has bumps and challenges and things that push it into certain directions, right? And there's the need to make decisions during projects. So it's the way I like to think of it is if you're going on a boat, for instance, before you go off, you decide, I'm going to sail west. That's the direction. That's the need we need to cover. But on the way, there's all sorts of things in your way, and there's a storm and this and that. You need that constant reminder of the direction you're going into. So thinking it as a compass. So that's why in our space, there's a lot of work done with the communities to make sure that projects don't happen aside from the community for them. It's with them. So that provides this compass to make sure that while you're doing it, all these micro decisions, all of these little nudges and changes don't effectively put you off course.
I would like to add to that. There's two things there, or maybe three things that stands out. The one is, as part of the SIC, we believe that the only way to deliver a particular strategy is via projects, programs, and portfolios. And the portfolio is a selection of strategic choices where you want to deliver on that particular strategy. Part of the SIC is to focus on those particular elements. And I agree with Rob, when we talk about the residents, we need to understand what is their requirements. And you can only successfully deliver a project if you understand the customer requirement, because project management at the end of the day is all about customer satisfaction. If you don't understand the requirements, you can't satisfy the customer. So I always tell my team and the new recruit, you don't need to answer this question, but you need to understand, where do you fit in towards the value chain, towards customer satisfaction and to the resident satisfaction. You need to understand that if you work in local government, that you're there to serve people. And the only way for you to serve people is to understand that whatever job you have to do, how does your job have an impact in the complete value chain towards the end customer at the end of the day?
Thank you for that wonderful answer. There are several things we can unpack there and several directions we can go, but let's start with the last thing that you mentioned, and that is the customers and who they are.
The customer is not one thing. It is a collection of people and businesses interacting with us in the city. So we've got, about 5 million residents here in the city of Cape Town and 600,000 households. Every single one of them is the customer. So bringing that down to the person, that could mean quite a lot of things. And that's why the aspect of integrating and communicating and understanding the customer is not a simple thing. It's complex. As you see engineering as something where you form something to do a job, and an architect is there to look after, and urban designers are there to look after aesthetic, project managers are there for the people. The job of bringing together all these stakeholder needs is, especially in our space, and I think in any project, is one of the most important things. So the customer is everyone here.
Cape Town is different than the rest of the metropoles in South Africa. Why there is a particular collection rate, as an example, why people keep on paying their rates and taxes, and that's because they receive value. And the moment that you receive value, you ultimately enable yourself to obtain more funds, because people see what the value is that they get for every cent that they pay.
Service delivery is one element. I think where Cape Town has been particularly stretched in relation to customer satisfaction, or whatever you want to call it, the response has been around two major crises within less than 5 years of each other, specifically the water crisis and the drought towards 2017, and COVID that followed literally within hours. It felt like hours of that crisis being resolved. Let's hear a bit about how you remember that, Ben, how you think the city adapted to that particular crisis through its projects and programming. You've mentioned this idea of the programs are basically the umbrella for the projects, and the lessons learned of, how it is now we find Cape Town knocking on other doors around the world saying this is how we dealt with it. Take what you think works for you. Any thoughts about how things work there?
Two different crises and two different responses. But I think the key thing there is your last sentence, Pete, and that was the lessons learned. We've made a big point about making sure that we capture the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly during the water crisis. I intentionally make sure that it's all four of those, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly, because normally people tend to only see lessons learned as the bad stuff and how can we improve. But what is essential is that there was good stuff that we've done. And those good stuff was things like the way that we communicated to the public, the way that we scheduled some of the activities, the way that we approached a particular crisis from a demand and supply point of view when it was the water crisis. First thing that we've done as a program team when COVID hit was to reflect on the lessons learned from the water disaster. And what we said to each other is, let's start with the good stuff. And we want to make sure that the good stuff is still being used during COVID. How can we then move over to the bad stuff, eliminate the bad stuff completely? How can we learn from the ugly, and what improvements do we need to have from an ugly perspective? Can we make sure that the beautiful things stay with us forever? And that was the approach that we followed. And that was our first program meeting that we had. I can recall I was sitting with my team very late on the Sunday evening when the president made his announcement. Immediately after that, we reflected. And it took us most probably about 5 to 6 hours later to just jot down everything. And I'm a firm believer that you need to record the lessons as you progress, because you tend to forget. And you can only remember things if it's written down on a piece of paper. That is pure basic principles now with my team, is to always reflect on the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly.
And can I just add there, from the perspective of someone who was a resident at that point, so the water crisis, especially before I started with the city, there was a lot happening behind the scenes. And knowing Ben now and all the stories, it certainly is fascinating to hear what the inner workings were and all of the stuff that happened From a resident's perspective, I think there was one huge success because, Bev, you're talking about customers. The one thing that was a success there, they turned customers into participants because the city's population became participants in this to try not to get to a point where there's no more water left, day zero as they called it. It was fascinating to see. I don't know if a lot of cities can actually claim that they could do this because it was absolutely fascinating and inspiring to see everyone pull together and not flushing the toilet, washing their dishes with a spray, one of these spray things and all sorts of things that people tend to not do at mass, which they did, which is one of the great communication successes.
People always ask me, what's the key thing that I took away from the water crisis? And I think that the major achievement was twofold, because we had a demand approach where we want to reduce the demand. Just before the water crisis in 2015, the peak demand at that point was 1,200 megaliters per day of usage. And in January 2018, we recorded 472 megaliters, which is almost a third of water usage of what it was before the drought. And then it was the supply component, but the supply component was so unknown because it's different technology, it's different kind of things that you need to try and get forward. But the beauty that we got right to create traction within the city to have a balanced portfolio of water supply. And I think that is one of the things that is really, really important for me because we were so dependent on surface water and the dam supplying us that we actually forgot about these other sources of water. And that ultimately got ourselves into the abstraction and the desalination approach, as well as now, how do we reduce water to its maximum benefit?
Yeah, so there's a full water resilience program at the moment with multiple water sources included. And that all flowed from there, didn't it?
And that forms part of that entire 120 billion portfolio, which you mentioned. If we look at the portfolio, 40%, just a little bit more than 40% of the portfolio is going into the water sector, because we don't want the resident, again, to shower in a bucket. We don't want to force people to wash with cold water. There's some stuff that people you want to enable them not to experience the second time.
I think one of the things that came through for me as you were reflecting on it, was how it felt at that time. And I've never been as nervous or anxious in my life as that period, because the idea of 4.5 to 5 million people of all ages, all abilities, all income groups having to rely on basically points of distribution in a wet and cold winter in the Western Cape, that was terrifying. It was a really scary scenario. And the fact that people didn't understand what the consumption, those numbers that you've talked about, Ben, back in the day, of how do I reduce by a third my consumption? And I think that's where, again, to my mind, the city's ability to communicate one wash, one flush equals this. And all of a sudden, people were able to think for themselves around reducing their own demand. And in so doing, it has, I think, had a legacy effect, which we see now obviously has impacts around, we've never really recovered, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but in terms of the revenue for those water sales. So now we have to look at alternative means to fund 120 billion rands worth of capex. But these are the challenges and the complexities of a metropolitan city in 2025, not so?
Pete, you used an important word there, legacy. And Ben, the first time you and I ever spoke, you used that same word. And I think it's critical for our listeners to understand one of the first messages that you shared with me those few years ago, and one that's coming through our conversation now. And that is all of the excitement and interest and energy in designing for the future or working toward a smarter future amounts to nothing if we're not dealing with the legacy issues of our recent past or longer. And I think one of the incredible demonstrations of leadership that can come out of Cape Town and South Africa more generally is their successful management, perhaps a little bumpy at times, but overall it's successful management of these legacy issues.
Before I get to the housing and to those other ones, one of the key things that is just so fascinating for me is the fact that at this point in time are still below the water usage per day, with the influx of people that came from semigration, and we're still below the usage of that particular scenario that we had of 1,200 megaliters a day. The latest stats is roughly between 800 and 900 megaliters of usage a day. So it is still 300 megaliters below what we used to have. That's some of the good stories and the reflections when I get opportunity. The second thing that I can add is, let's talk about energy a bit just before we get to the housing. Of course, the housing market is complex. That is because of decisions that was made while I was still at school. There's various decisions that now has a huge impact on various things, which is difficult to turn around. And what we're trying to do from a housing perspective is what we call small-scale rental units, and we try to manage the particular informal market more carefully with an integrated approach, understanding all the infrastructure requirements that's required, and enable that to reduce. And that is, in Cape Town, in the context of Cape Town, it's definitely not an easy task. It is something that we will need to work hard on. When we talk about energy, and this also reflects now to what you mentioned, Beverly, about the leadership. I'm a firm believer that leadership flows from the top. We've got one magnificent mayor at this point in time. I can remember my first day that I met him. We had a top 300 meeting. He came and he said to me, now that my name is Jordan, I said to him, yes, I'm Ben. Good day, Mayor. And he said to me, you will not call me Mayor again. And I was looking, within the government sector, the bureaucracy and titles is of vital importance. And they said to me, Ben, you cannot call me Mayor because you're building a brick wall between me and you because you think I'm more important than you. And that is not the case. We are actually equal individuals. You've got roles and responsibilities. I've got roles and responsibilities, and let's respect that. And that itself is the leadership element that flows through the entire organization from the top straight through. He came in with, I don't know if you know about load shedding, Beverly, but we've got a thing here in South Africa called load shedding, where they switch off your power for extended periods of time. There's different levels, and sometimes when it's, I think the most extreme, they switch off our power for 12 hours of the day, where you don't have any power. And Jordan came in and said, one of the key things that I would like to enable Cape Town is to navigate ourselves through load shedding, because it's not good for the economy. You cannot switch off manufacturing and those kind of industries. You cannot switch them off because you will never ever be able to grow your economy if they don't have power. And it's our responsibility to enable that economic growth. And not even R1 billion can prevent you if you look at the broader economy and the impact on the economy. So don't think about how much it's going to cost. Think about what is it that you want to achieve. And we call, at this particular point in time, Cape Town is 2 levels below the national load shedding criteria. We're working towards a level to reduce it with 4 levels. I believe by around about August, September, we will most probably hear the news that we're 3 levels down from national load shedding. And then the aim is, before the term of office is completed, is to be 4 levels down. He came in with a simple message. We were sitting around the table. He gave us one of these small candles that you just for love and charity. And he said to me, once we achieve this target, we will bring this candle with. Don't throw it away. Don't use it. We will bring it with around this table, because it will be the last time that we will lit that candle to provide light. And that is some of the legacy things that adds via the leadership, in my opinion.
Colleagues, I think you've given a really good expression there of some of the leadership qualities and the thinking, and just, as I say, some of the, on the one hand, simple messaging, but the amount of time and effort that goes on behind the scenes to give life to that and execute, I think, is a whole nother conversation. And particularly, Beverly, you've mentioned the housing. I think that's another conversation in its own time and its own place, because that is well worth going into, particularly within a metropolitan context like the city of Cape Town. I know that you've got commitments this afternoon, both of you, Ben and Rob, and we're going to bring the conversation to a somewhat curtailed ending here. But perhaps that you would like to point our listeners to the website or information where people can find out a bit more about the work that you're doing. Where can people find out more about what you're doing and the project management team and their approaches?
We've got a website. If you want to get involved with the special interest group for Smarter Urban Rural, you click on the link, you will see the Smarter Urban Rural. There's approximately 15 or 16 different SIGs where you can get involved with. One of my colleagues is running the PMO SIG. We've got an artificial intelligence SIG. We've got smarter universities. There's 16 different SIGs that IPMA is offering. And to find out more, just go and click on the link. You'll find the detail and we will welcome you with open arms. We would really like to just explore. It is a voluntary organization talking about similar things that is of interest for everybody.
Yeah, and if you go on IPMA, sig.ipma.world, and you go to these SIGs, you'll notice that what they do is they upload previous webinars. So there's actually quite a lot of content there already. So it spans a wide variety of topics. Us as the Smarter Urban Rural SIG we try to do webinars every second month. And we've got quite a few already uploaded there. So for anyone interested in this space, just by going to the site, you'll be able to find a lot of information and on what the next webinar would be, and you can listen in live.
And Rob, whilst you're on, just in terms of the city's own website or contact points?
So at the City of Cape Town, we've got a public site, capetown.gov.za. So it's fairly easy to find. You'll see for the residents in the city, that's a sort of a one-stop shop. You can get all the information, be it a policy, be it a spatial plan, everything is up there. So for the city itself, you can see all the news there. If you follow some of our leaders on the social media, you'll probably get more up-to-date information if you want to see what's happening here and now. So our Mayor, Jordan Neal-Lewis, has got a very active X profile, LinkedIn, and it's interesting to follow him as well.
Thanks so much to both of you there in Cape Town. I know you've got to run and you've got some commitments, but I want to, from my side, say thank you so much to the both of you. And Beverly, any final words for the team there?
I'd like to repeat your gratitude. There is so much more that we could talk about. Perhaps we can have part 2 of this conversation. It's an important perspective coming from South Africa, but also the issues that you raise that aren't necessarily top of mind for more developed cities, but they should be. So let's maybe figure out another appointment. Thank you so much, and thank you for the leadership that you show through the SIG.
Thank you very much, Bev. It's been a pleasure. We really enjoyed ourselves.
Thanks, Bev and Pete.
Good, I'm glad.
Enjoy the weekend, colleagues. Keep safe, look after yourself, and all the very best with your endeavours there at the city. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Cities Are for Living podcast of the IPMA, the International Project Management Association. Please feel free to send us feedback, your thoughts on the content we provided, and if you'd like to get involved via sur@ipma.world. The SUR standing for Smarter Urban Rural, one of the task teams that's alluded to in one of our pilot episodes. So sur@ipma.world. We'd love to hear your feedback, and please get in contact. Tell us what you think.